Alright, let's move this light. Okay, so how do we feel about that? Fuck it, whatever. Now, an Obi-Wan Kenobi show is a good idea for a piece of content because everyone wished that they could see more of Ewan McGregor being Obi-Wan. But it's a pretty bad idea for a piece of content because there's no story here. There isn't a show here. So going in, just based on the idea of the show, I wasn't anticipating anything. I wouldn't have even watched it if I didn't think I could get some content out of it. So I guess I have some nerd nitpicks. It's a shame that I have some nerd nitpicks, but I think I'll deal with them up top so you know how fucked up and biased I am, and then I'll get into some actual analysis. So I don't really think you can tell a story here. In between episode 3 and episode 4, Obi-Wan goes off to be in exile forever and watch over Luke Skywalker forever. There isn't a story to tell. I think a lot of the George Lucas Star Wars kind of works on a fairy tale logic. I think after the ridiculous wrapping everything up in a bow happy ending of Return of the Jedi, it doesn't make sense to do any storytelling after that. And I feel the same here. Obi-Wan going off to be in exile forever is sort of a, you know, ridiculous, broad piece of storytelling, but it works on a thematic level. Literalizing it undermines that. It doesn't make sense to have a galaxy-trotting adventure in the middle of that, which I think most people realize. But it is something that this show has to do. So the question they had making the show was, how do you tell a story here without doing too much damage? And I think the framing is pretty clever. Having Princess Leia be kidnapped and Obi-Wan has to go off and rescue her is not bad. Of course it does undermine a lot of the pre-existing Star Wars story. It causes a bunch of problems, but as far as things that you could do here, that's not a bad piece of framing. Before this came out, I rewatched 4K 77, a restoration of some original Star Wars film prints. It's really good, you should check it out. And one of the things that stuck out to me watching it was actually just how strong of a character Princess Leia is. Right at the top of the movie, they're stranded in the middle of nowhere. They're in a no-win situation. She hatches a plan to get captured, but send the Death Star plans down to Tatooine, which is in the middle of fucking nowhere, but she knows that her father knew a Jedi who was there, so she sends the robot to him, and Princess Leia's little plan there is going to cause the events of Star Wars to happen. But it just struck me how sort of clever that is, how strong of a character she comes across as. And, you know, she constantly seems to know more than the rest of the characters in the story. They escape from the Death Star on the Millennium Falcon, and Princess Leia's the one to go, well, they're tracking us, obviously. Very strong character, right? Especially for the time. But of course, as with any recent entry in Star Wars, they have to explain why things are like that. So it isn't that she hatched this crazy long-shot plan. It's that she was sending the plans down to her childhood friend and rescuer. You know, it isn't that she is smarter than everyone else. It's just that one time when she was a kid, the same thing happened on her adventures with Obi-Wan. And I think even just the idea of having Darth Vader and Obi-Wan interact at all, let alone fight, in between those two episodes, it just undermines the pre-existing story. So I maybe like this show less because it's bad Star Wars in some way. But I think I can somewhat compartmentalize it. I probably can't completely compartmentalize it, but to me, a much bigger problem was actually not that the show was undermining these pre-existing stories, but that it was also undermining itself. It's a story built around narratively excusing its existence. To set up this kind of silly little narrative, the plotting of the show itself is nonsense. The characters who existed before are now like parody versions of those characters. They can't really be fleshed out or changed. It's like a facsimile of you know, it's like a fan film version of these characters that we know. And then the new characters are paper thin. They obviously can't be that important, and the most fleshed out character in this show, the third sister, you know, is barely fleshed out at all. Like, sort of as fleshed out as a side character in an episode of a kid's cartoon. And then of course there's no stakes. Everyone is guaranteed to end up back where they started. Obi-Wan has a sort of pseudo character arc, but not really. It's a lot like a Marvel show. I mean, it's basically the same as a Marvel show, but like the Marvel stories, they are theoretically part of this interconnected world, this whatever, long-form storytelling, shared universe, whatever the fuck. Continuing stories, that's the Disney official brand language for that. But where the Marvels are theoretically interconnected, outside of like the big events, that really just amounts to Easter eggs. Like, Moon Knight isn't reliant on information that's all dotted about elsewhere. It doesn't really matter. And it very rarely does matter. But here is a show that's built entirely around story that happened elsewhere. I think if you had never seen a Star Wars, you'd be like, what the fuck is happening? And if you have seen a Star Wars, you'd also be like, what the fuck is happening? Like, they've developed a really intricate puzzle piece to slot into this pre-existing story, and it's so fucking, it's nonsense on its own, and it doesn't really fit in either. And then of course, it's not really about the story. They escalate it as quickly as possible to a galaxy-trotting action adventure. Now, I do want to get a little bit deeper into the plotting and the aesthetics, but I think it's maybe worth just rattling off what I liked and didn't like episode to episode, because there are glints of something vaguely worthwhile occasionally. God. Yeah, that's how good it was. I made some notes as I was watching, and I'm just sort of going to power through this. Really, so that if you haven't seen the show, we'll be working with the same language. So this section of the video is probably quite skippable. After this, I intend on saying some cogent things about plotting and the aesthetics. So anyway, so to start, episode 1 I thought was broadly pretty good. You know, we do get to see Obi-Wan living a miserable hermit life. There's some nice stuff in the sort of dialogue between Obi-Wan and Benny Safdie, and in the conversation between Obi-Wan and Owen Lars. And some nice stuff setting up Child Leia as well. Really just some nice character moments. The rest of the show, the broad plotting of it, I thought was very weak. I think the Inquisitors as villains, I mean, they are from a kid's cartoon, right? And that's what they feel like. Very unnecessary, very tacked on, just sort of silly supervillains. They don't really work in this format, in this show, but obviously it's more about tying their products together. And there's some quite weak stuff older on with Child Leia as well, including a very dodgy chase sequence. And then episode 2 has some nice stuff. I thought the establishing of this new cyberpunk planet it was pretty good. We get to see some Detective Obi-Wan stuff, which is always a bit of fun. And there is the reveal to Obi-Wan that Darth Vader is Anakin and he's still alive, which is a lovely little character moment. But I feel like the idea of that moment is better than the execution of it. As well as this cyberpunk planet is often quite silly. It doesn't look very good, and it feels quite confined in terms of its action. It's obviously just made up of little volume sets, which I guess is fine. The action itself is very aimless. I think like the last 20, probably the back half of this episode is just sort of like ambling about. There's a very dodgy rooftop action scene, including some dodgy parkour, and the geography and the stakes of it aren't really established very well at all, and it just feels like it doesn't need to happen. Episode 3 is where it really gets into nonsense territory. I like the continuation of Obi-Wan struggling with this reveal that Anakin's alive. I like this sort of bus ride with the stormtroopers. There's some good character moments there. Some whimsy side character stuff. It's not bad. And they discover this safe house program for young Jedi or whatever. And that's nice. And the introduction to the nice safe house lady is nice. But again, the back half of this episode has some really dodgy action. The Empire and Darth Vader show up, and Darth Vader is sort of shot like like a monster, you know. It's trying to be epic and it's doing fan service and stuff, and it's just it just kind of lost me. And then episode 4, it's really gimmicky. It's really crumbling under its own weight. I like the dialogue, again, character moment between Leia and the fucking, I don't know what number sister she is. First sister? Third sister? I thought the silly infiltration stuff was fun and silly. The nice safe house lady gets the exact same beat where she's almost found out but then has to bluff her way through. She just does that 3 times in a row, and you know what? It's fun every time. But then the plotting itself, this whole thing of, oh, we have to infiltrate the Death Star and save Princess Leia, is so stupid. Even without the meta stuff that's the plot of Star Wars, it's just not done very well. And the sort of location of this epic evil fortress where they store all the Jedi is very silly. And once again, it devolves into bad action at the end, and this sort of payoff is that some nobody dies and then we're supposed to care about it. It's sort of a simple gimmick episode, but it feels very silly. It feels like it wants to be taken seriously, and it's just nonsense. Then episode 5 is quite unique in terms of style. I feel like they really actually lean into the silliness here. But it is still very stupid, you know. It's got this framing device of Anakin and Obi-Wan doing a training duel, mirroring the beats of the story. So you see a bit of the plot of the episode, and then you see a bit of this training duel and back and forth, right? I kind of like that, and I don't mind the sort of overall plotting of it. You know, the plotting around the good guys having to run away, and Obi-Wan trying to help people while keeping a low profile. It's nice, it's got a good sort of tension to it. It's plot-wise, this actually functions. Once again, I think there's some nice character stuff between Obi-Wan and the, whatever, sister. And it was kind of inevitable, but it's nice to see the nice safe house lady eat it. But then the framing device is so goofy and so sort of tonally doing the opposite of the episode, it kind of undermines the episode itself. And of course we're treated to some bad action and Darth Vader being so fucking epic. Like, Darth Vader isn't really a coherent character here. It's Darth Vader as perceived by pop culture, recontextualized as a movie monster filtered through a streaming show. Okay, I'm gonna go back to a nitpick here, because in Star Wars, right, the most threatening thing that Darth Vader did was walk through a door, you know? And this sort of new Disney Darth Vader thing of him being this unstoppable tank monster is ridiculous and never justified. You know, they're constantly trying to escalate, so Darth Vader has to be more hardcore than ever before. He has to be shot more extremely than ever before. It doesn't feel like the story earns that. It's just like they're trying to sort of juice it up unnecessarily for the sake of, well, it's fan service. I'm just describing fan service. That's what it is. Anyway, overall, it feels like a non-story. It feels like a tie-in video game plot. Like when they made that one about how Jango Fett got hired by Count Dooku. I've never actually played that, but I assume it's like this. In fact, this shares a lot of the sort of overall plotting with Fallen Order, which I think actually did a better job with it. It turns out it's easier to tell a story when you're working with characters instead of just reused assets. Literally. This fortress place that they go to was designed by the team at Respawn for Jedi Fallen Order. And now, because they have like a story team managing their continuity, they have to reuse that in this show. Episode 5, I guess, literally takes place in a video game level. You know, a lot of the dialogue itself is written really well. The detail of it is great. It's fine. It's good. It's well-written dialogue. But, well, screenwriters love to write kids as little shits. I don't know if it's just an American thing. It's not my experience interacting with children that they are constantly being a fucking dickhead. Even as a kid, I remember being put off by kids in movies. They're so fucking annoying, which is definitely a writing problem. The one guy who does it well is Shane Black, because he has these precocious, annoying kids, but then all the adults are like, oh, fuck off, you know, so it's fine. Anyway, it's paced very fast, which I don't mind. I like a fast pace, but it's constantly racing past these character moments and interesting plot beats for the sake of fan service and shitty action. It's a string of cheap and nasty set pieces punctuated by the occasional character moment, where I really just want to see the character moment. But let's talk about why the action looks cheap, why this show looks cheap. Obviously, this is their first go-round getting A-list talent into a Star Wars show, and that's obviously going to decrease their budget significantly. We've seen that with the Marvels, as I talked about in the Moon Knight video, but the introduction of high-paid talent brings the budget down and dramatically decreases the aesthetic quality of any scenes involving that talent. But like, The Mandalorian was actually a cheap show and innovated a lot of this tech that makes them able to make these shows cheaply. But it was creatively cheap, right? They were playing with the limitations that they had, and now those tools are established. They don't need to experiment. So, like the volume, obviously, a new way of doing digital sets, in-camera green screen with its own quite nice aesthetic quality. And I've been very complimentary of the volume in the past. I really like the look of it. But here, they're kind of even using it in places where it doesn't really fit. All the action takes place in this little circle in the middle of the room, and then there's just sort of nothing beyond that. You know, that was always a criticism of green screen, right? Was that all your action felt confined. It felt like they were just actors on stages. You didn't get a sense of scale, which never really made sense to me. You know, a green screen set can be way larger than a practical one. You have basically unlimited space to do your action. The Marvel movies actually do have a lot of flat wide shots in their action, right? It's not a hard thing to shoot. And like the prequels have this immense sense of scale because they didn't have to completely create these environments digitally. They would do like paintings to fill in the background. But I think you really lose that sense of scale here. Everything feels very confined, and there's basically no establishing shots in the action. And it's really, you have the volume, which is a great tool for a specific job. That rooftop setting in the Batman is a great place to use a volume. Nice sort of sunsetty glow, and you get to have a sort of 3D environment projected out beyond the scene. Every location in your show is maybe not the best use case. And a maybe more nitpicky way that it looks cheap is with the lightsabers. They, obviously with the sequel movies, they've introduced these light up prop lightsabers. Again, something that I've been very complimentary of. Again, I think maybe something that has specific use cases and has places where you might not want to use that. But here they're taking it even further. They're often not rotoscoping the lightsaber blade back on top. The way that lightsabers have looked forever is that they glow completely white, right? They're fully overexposed into camera. In this show, they're often not doing that step. They're just using the raw footage of the prop lightsabers, which just makes it look like they're swinging toys around, because they are. But I think a good thing to come out of them trying to cheap out as much as possible is they didn't really do any digital de-aging. There was no deep fake Hayden Christensen here. Looks to me like they maybe did a little bit of skin smoothing, but that was it. It's the sort of thing that you'd expect them to take further, but they don't need to. The effects aren't the story. So as a show, it's not really any good. I don't hate it. I probably won't watch the last episode because I won't get any content out of that. I think less could have happened. I don't mind things moving at a clip. In fact, I quite like it, but I'm not looking for epic moments. And this feels like it's moving at a clip just to get to those epic moments. Sometimes the editing was disorientating, the direction style was flat, the action was unintelligible, the dialogue was sometimes weak, the plotting overall was just dumb. But, you know, they had to make a product out of an area of this larger narrative where there is no story to tell. And they've kind of done that. A lot of the craft behind it is serviceable. They've got professionals doing their job to put this thing together, and they put a thing together. Does this work? Does this have any value outside of Star Wars? No, I don't think so. Does this tell us anything about Star Wars or inform Star Wars in any way? No, I don't think so. Is there any internal plotting or anything that we can get out of it? No. But it is a thing that exists. If you are looking for something that's, you know, turn your brain off and look at some iconography, it's an option. Otherwise, forget it. There's nothing here.